So about a month ago, I did a mailbag video, and in the title I included Harry Giles' name because I was asked a question about the Blazers potentially signing Harry Giles to be our backup center. And in that video, I said this. I'd be fine with it. I think he has some untapped potential, but also on the same hand, I think we can have a really good bench next year without having to rely on a guy like Harry Giles realizing that potential. I don't really want to take a risk on a Mario Hezonja type of player where hopefully he can step up and provide what we need, but we don't know because he's never done it before, you know? Harry Giles has been better during his career than Mario Hezonja has ever been, but still, I would rather rely on vet players that you know what you're going to get night in and night out instead of a guy like a Harry Giles. Basically, I was intrigued by him, but I didn't necessarily want to rely on him being our mainstay as the backup center. Thing is, we got Enes Kanter in that role, the same guy who was our starting center when we made our Western Conference Finals run, so I was okay with that. What I didn't expect was for us to be able to get Harry Giles as our third string backup center. I figured he would get a contract in the range of about $4 to $5 million for a few years, and that it would take at least part of our mid-level exception in order to get him. That's why I wasn't planning on Harry Giles really being an option this offseason. So I was shocked when I saw that we had signed him to a minimum contract after we had already established our backup center. Harry Giles is the best flyer that Neil Olshey has ever taken on any player during his tenure as the Portland Trail Blazers GM. First, let's look at his backstory before we get into what he could potentially bring this team. He was the #1 rated player in his high school class for a while. That was a class that included De'Aaron Fox and Jason Tatum. Tatum even went as far to say that Harry Giles was the best player in his class. However, Giles missed half of his high school career. During his sophomore season, he tore one ACL, and during his senior season, he tore the ACL in his other knee. Giles then went on to miss part of his lone college season at Duke University because he had to have surgery to clean up issues in one of his knees. So this guy has some injury concerns, which is why the Portland Trail Blazers were able to get him on a minimum contract. It saw him drop from a potential #1 pick to the 20th overall pick in the 2017 NBA draft. Now, for those of you who remember that draft, that pick was actually the Portland Trail Blazers in the first place. The Blazers traded the 15th pick, which was Justin Jackson, as well as the 20th pick in Harry Giles for the 10th pick, which they used to get Zach Collins. However, you could make the argument that that trade hasn't really worked out too well for the Portland Trail Blazers. I'm still high on Collins' long-term potential, and I will have a video at some point explaining why I'm not giving up on him, because it seems like a lot of Blazer fans are doing that right now, and I'm not on board with that. But you could make the argument that Giles has been more productive during his NBA career than Zach Collins has been. So with that being said, let's look at Giles' statistical production from last season. Last season, he played 14.5 minutes per game, he averaged 7 points per game, 4 rebounds, and a little over 1 assist. He shot 55% from the field and a solid 77.6% from the free throw line. However, 14.5 minutes per game isn't a whole lot, and it's kind of hard to judge just how productive he was on a per-minute basis just based off those numbers. So for that reason, let's look at his per 36 numbers. Now, obviously, gotta provide some context here. His stats probably wouldn't be this good if he was playing 36 minutes per game. He'd be a little bit more fatigued. Obviously, it's not a direct translation, but this is just to illustrate his statistical production if it was stretched out over a 36-minute period. His per 36-minute stats last season were this: 17 points per game, 10 rebounds per game, 3.2 assists per game, 1.2 steals per game, and a block per game. To me, that looks like a really good all-around player. One thing that jumps out to you when you watch his highlights is this guy can pass the ball. He makes a lot of passes that centers can't make. He makes a lot of passes that reminds me of our own starting center in Jusuf Nurkic. This has me intrigued because if Kanter doesn't perform well or if he gets injured, Giles has shown that he can produce in the NBA, and he could probably step in and do a solid job as our backup center. Even more so, he would provide some consistency in terms of the playmaking at that position. We would have high-level passing at the center position for 48 minutes per game with a Nurkic-Giles center rotation. If a guy like Derrick Jones Jr. comes off the bench, it would be intriguing to watch Giles' passing paired with a freak athlete like Derrick Jones. Giles also has a decent jump shot. He hasn't really stretched it out to 3 yet, but he has a very solid and sound shooting form. I wouldn't be surprised if this season he starts taking some threes and hitting a decent amount of them. them. He was almost a 78% free throw shooter and has shown that he can hit mid-range shots during his NBA career. At some point, he's going to stretch it out to 3 and become a more complete player because of that. He can also handle the ball decently well for a center. That, combined with his playmaking, combined with his three-point shooting potential, gives him the potential to be a true perimeter 5. The thing is, he's also a solid rebounder, and he's a little bit of a rim protector as well. While he's not great in either of these areas, he's solid enough that combined with his perimeter skill set, it makes him a very intriguing option long term. Now, positionally, he is kind of in the mold of Zach Collins. He can play the 4 and he can play the 5. 5 might be his more natural position, just like Collins, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him playing a little bit of power forward depending on some potential injuries, for potential rest days for guys like a Carmelo Anthony. It'll be intriguing just to see how he's used. Now, here's the thing though. Our team is very, very deep, and I wouldn't be shocked if he's not in our rotation from day one. That's why this signing was so crazy, because I didn't think Giles would want to come to a place like Portland where it's going to be a struggle for minutes. Presumably, Enes Kanter is the backup 5, Carmelo Anthony is the backup 4. That's not even taking into account Zach Collins. This team is so deep, it's going to have a problem getting guys the minutes they feel like they deserve. It's a good problem to have, but it is going to be a problem for Terry Stotts to try and figure out. Once Collins comes back, Giles could be the 4th big man off the bench. He could be behind Collins, Melo, as well as Kanter. That's crazy to me because Giles is good enough to potentially be the first big off the bench for many NBA teams. A lot of other teams he could be the 2nd big off the bench, so for him to potentially be our 4th big off the bench, that's crazy to me. Last season, for stretches, we had to play Anthony Tolliver at center. We had to play Caleb Swanigan. It was rough. Our center depth was absolutely shot. Now we legitimately have 4 guys that can play the center position that have produced on an NBA level. Nurkic, Kanter, Collins, Giles. So even if injuries strike that position, we're going to be far more prepared to deal with them this year than we were last season. But it is going to be intriguing to see if Giles can step up, maybe even potentially steal the backup center role from an Enes Kanter. Giles is more mobile and probably better defending the pick and roll. If the Blazers want to employ a more aggressive pick and roll scheme defensively, Giles fits that better than an Enes Kanter because Kanter can really only play drop coverage. Giles, however, has the foot speed to get up and hedge, get up and trap, and play pretty much any pick and roll scheme defensively. But what's really going to be interesting is to see who wins out in the coaching staff's eyes once Zach Collins returns from injury. Collins and Giles provide a lot of the same things. Collins is a little bit more of a proven three-point shooter. Giles is a better passer. So it'll be intriguing to see if Zach Collins goes from starter last season to completely falling out of the rotation, or if they decide to play Collins over Giles. I don't know Harry Giles well enough to know how upset he's going to be if he's not getting any minutes, but that's why it shocked me that he even signed here in the first place, because we already knew we had a logjam of big men, and I assume he knew that coming in, and apparently he still wanted to come here, so great, awesome, I love this signing. There's nothing wrong with this signing. I'm just curious to see how the playing time sorts itself out. And lastly, we only signed him to a 1-year deal on a minimum contract, so next season, if we want to bring him back for anything more than about $2 million, we would have to use a free agent exception on him. We'd either have to use our biannual exception, or we'd potentially have to use part of our mid-level exception. The thing is, you only get the biannual exception 1 out of every 2 years. The Blazers didn't use it this year because they wanted to stay out of the tax, and we might have enough room under the tax next season to potentially utilize that asset. Maybe if Giles wants to stay here long term and we think he's a good fit, maybe we sign him for about $4 million per year next offseason with the biannual exception. If not, maybe we use part of the mid-level exception on him. I don't really know. It's going to be tough to keep him here long term because I feel like he's going to play and outplay his contract and be healthy, and then he's going to get an offer next offseason that we can't really compete with. Or he's going to struggle, maybe not get minutes at all, and be unhappy that he's not getting minutes, and then he'll want to leave. So I don't know if he's a long-term fit on this roster. I'd lean towards no just because of the contract situation. It'll be interesting to see if the coaching staff values Zach Collins because we have control over him long-term, or if they just play the better player, and that might be Giles. But don't assume Giles is going to be here for the next 5 years or so. He's only on a 1-year minimum contract, and it's going to be hard to retain him next offseason. Regardless, I still love this signing, and I'm very excited to watch Giles play in a Portland Trail Blazer uniform. So let me know what you you think of the Giles signing down in the comment section below. I'm very eager to read your thoughts, so go ahead and leave a comment. Leave a like on this video, it helps me out a bunch, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And that's a wrap. Thank you guys for watching. I'll catch you guys later. As always, peace out. Go Blazers.